Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 140 in the best way to do cataract surgery series. This is a pretty typical 2 to 3 plus stents lens, and you're going to see double chop, cross chop mechanical fracturing, and just see how I'm able to easily disassemble this lens, being able to crush the lens pieces between the instruments, and again, crushing it into smaller pieces, thereby using less ultrasonic energy, and as a result, having clear corneas postoperatively. And so this is why I feel like this is the best way to do cataract surgery. So I use a cotton tip to steady the eye and use a corneal marker, which will help me to center and size the rhexis. Make my paracentesis incision first on the right side and then the left side, making sure I'm parallel to the iris plane, which creates a nice corneal shelf, which will allow me to achieve a self-sealing incision. This is intracameral lidocaine and then some intracameral epinephrine and then some dispersive viscoelastic to coat the corneal endothelium and to flatten the anterior capsule. And this is the triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove, tunnel through the cornea, and then when I'm ready, I turn the eye towards me, and then I enter. And these are the Haldane-Perkar forceps. Go ahead and puncture the center, pull down towards me, grab the right side of the tear, which creates a flap, go around circumferentially, using the corneal mark that I made to help the size and centration of the rhexis. I'm able to have really excellent control of the rhexis with these forceps. Perp some viscoelastic out. This is the capsular fornix hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rhexis edge, contra-incisionally, point the tip down, get a nice wave, turn the tip back up, decompress on the left side, point the tip down on the right, and you can see the lens begins to spin already. Irrigating the surface of the cornea, lifting the incision with a chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma. Removing the surface epinuclear material, place the chopper under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, the phaco tip vertically sub-incisionally, bringing the instruments together and crushing the lens in half. That's double chop, placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, pulling it towards the phaco tip, which is deep in the bag, fracturing the right heminucleus, that is cross chop. Using some vacuum to lift that first quadrant up, crushing the lens between the instruments, and then very carefully emulsifying the lens piece, utilizing minimal amounts of ultrasonic energy here. Placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, crushing it between the instruments there. Crushing the lens piece between the instruments and emulsifying the lens piece. There's that one little remnant of that quadrant. Just grabbed it with some vacuum, lifting it up, and then crushed it and emulsified the lens piece. Turning the second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around it, placing the phaco tip deep, crushing the lens between the instruments, doing the same maneuver, crushing the lens between the instruments around that third quadrant, grabbing the lens piece with some vacuum, positioning the chopper around the lens, crushing the lens piece again, and then emulsifying the lens piece. You can see how much control I have. It's very little rushing. There's really not a whole lot of maneuvering here. I'm just trying to sandwich the lens piece between the instruments and then emulsifying the lens piece. And again, this is somewhat of a softer lens. I'm able to use fracturing forces to crush the lens piece, but it all begins with being able to place the chopper around the lens. That's the critical step. As long as you know how to place the chopper around the lens, then everything is easy. And for some reason, people have a mental block. They don't want to place the chopper around the lens. And I really don't understand why. It is the single best thing you can do as far as taking your technique to the next level. If you can learn how to place that chopper around the equator of the lens, it will open up so many potential opportunities in very challenging situations where you're able to get yourself out of trouble. Using vacuum to get yourself out of trouble is really a bad idea. You might be able to get away with it, but in a lot of ways, and a lot of times, you won't be able to. By placing the chopper at the equatorial plane, hooking lens pieces up out of the bag, it is really a very powerful way of getting the lens out. Because remember, the lens is pretty big, and the capsular opening is only 5 to 6 millimeters in the center, and the lens is actually lodged up into the capsular fornix. And so by trying to grab it from the front and pulling it towards you, it's really not very efficient, and that vacuum can grab things that it shouldn't grab, namely the iris and the posterior capsule. By hooking the lens from behind it, instead of pulling it, you're actually pushing it from the other side, and it's a much more efficient, much more delicate, and a much more easy way to lift that lens piece up out of the bag. And so that's why I've been advocating this technique for several years now. And so if you out there are thinking about taking your technique to the next level, that's my recommendation, is learning to be confident, committing to placing the chopper around the lens. By doing it that way, you're able to really leverage mechanical forces for your technique, and you won't be kind of stuck trying to fumble around and getting lens pieces up. There should never be an excuse of having the nuclear bowl. You know, when I was a resident, they talked about, the dreaded bowl. You bowled out the lens. And when you bowl out the lens, that means you used vacuum to grab the lens up. And when you did that, pieces of the lens just kind of broke off. And so the lens just broke off. And every time you try to grab a lens piece and it breaks off, you're losing precious real estate, right? Because as you're grabbing pieces, what happens is you can't grab there anymore, because underneath the lens is the posterior capsule now. So then you have to pick some other place to grab, and then you grab it there, and then boom, you lost that piece too. And so you're going around into the entire lens, and you're trying to find areas that will allow you to grab the lens piece up. But because the lens is brittle, it's just falling apart on you. After you do that, basically all throughout the lens, and you have nothing left, you have that bowled out situation. And now you're stuck, because if you're trying to grab the lens now, well, now the posterior capsule is right there, and you're going to try to grab that lens piece, and the posterior capsule is right underneath it. So to me, that's a terrible technique, and that's a terrible way to put yourself into harm's way. It's really unnecessary, and it's it's because we were taught that way. We were taught to grab stuff, and grabbing lens pieces with vacuum, to me, is really not smart. And part of that is because the lens is still adherent to the bag in some of these cases, and so you have to be mindful of that. I mean, you can try to hydrodissect again, which is one trick in that situation, because if the lens is still stuck to the bag, well, that's why if you have a lens that's brittle, you try to grab it with vacuum, it just falls apart. But the other thing you can do is just be confident and know how to hold the lens pieces up. Get under it, get around it, and just hook it up. And when you do it that way, it just makes life so much easier. You're giving yourself a competitive advantage. You don't have to stress yourself out in those situations, because it's really very routine. You don't have to get nervous. And more importantly, you're going to be doing better for the patient. The patient doesn't want a surgeon that they're going to be struggling with lenses. But I do fine in these situations, but not in these other situations. A patient doesn't want a surgeon who's like that. A patient wants to have a surgeon who's confident and capable of tackling all sorts of cataracts, big pupils, small pupils, good zonules, bad zonules, soft lenses, hard lenses, all of those situations. And so for me, if you know how to hook pieces up out of the bag by using the chopper, you're really, really expanding your repertoire and your armamentarium in doing cataract surgery. I think you'll be a safer surgeon, a more confident surgeon, and a more capable surgeon if you utilize these very important techniques. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.